Good evening. It is 5:30 and we'll go ahead and call our meeting to order. First order of business will be roll call. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Leighton,
Here.
Mr. Owen,
Here.
Mr. Graves,
Here.
Mr. Eckert,
Here.
Mrs. Hughes.
Here.
Mayor, we have a quorum present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. First order of business is consideration of approval of EMC for liability insurance through Riley Insurance Company. Mr. Hendershot, are you introducing the issue? I can't hear you, Mr. Hendershot. Actually, I see Ms. Jones is online. Ms. Jones, are you introducing the issue?
I would. It's my understanding that there were some questions that required us to speak to Kevin at Riley. Is that correct, Jim?
Okay, did you mean Kevin O'Brien?
Yes.
Okay,
Kevin O'Brien with Riley Insurance. So
is he coming
able
online
to
with us today?
See if they- Mayor, can you hear me now?
I can now. Thank you, Mr. Hendershot.
Okay. Spoke with Mr.
No, Mr. Hendershot, we could hear you through your headset, but we can't hear you now.
My apologies. Okay, I spoke with Councilman Leighton earlier today. He had some questions and some points to bring up, and I've asked Kevin O'Brien to be on the call. I don't see that he's on there yet. The issue that Mr. Leighton brought up, and I think it's a very, very viable issue, is the risk, if you will, risk reward between the aesthetic damages that a hailstorm could cause that would not be covered under EMC, but would be covered under the travelers. However, the risk reward there, if you will, is that you have a higher deductible with the traveler's policy. I did talk with Mr. O'Brien, and that is correct. EMC does not cover aesthetic damage, that we would have to show that there is a lack of function due to that damage. So an example would be the aluminum panels on the front of the police department, if those were simply dinged, or metal roofs, metal walls on, say, the community center or the civics, not civic center, but public works building, or the gutters or the flashings or the roof vents, and those were simply damaged and dinged, but still functional, they would not be covered. And you run the risk of having a building that say, for example, the front of the police department, the potential is there that it could look like somebody hit with a ball peen hammer several places, but there's no insurance coverage for it. So we would be out for those repairs or replacement. So that's the risk, if you will. You get a little better coverage, but you get a higher deductible with the traveler's policy versus the EMC, where you get no aesthetic coverage, but considerably less deductible. Mr. Leighton, am I representing you that correctly for you?
Yeah. And when you think of it, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that as hail comes through, and I've dealt with this on claims for insurance companies for a city, is it's not going to typically, like a homeowner has one house and it's not going to be so widespread. But if you have 5-10 buildings, like we have the community center, and there's a lot of metals on it. You have the public works buildings. You have our civic center, and those police department, and we get like a 1-inch hail, and it gets all dinged up. It's not going to get covered because it's aesthetic in nature. For metals on those types of structures, it could take very large hail to cause you to have a problem for function. I mean, we're talking, it would take almost at least possibly 1.5 to 2 inch diameter hail to start getting to the point where you would actually cause a problem with function. Whereas aesthetics is easily in the range of possibly even a 5/8. It depends on the density of the hail. But you're also talking like the roofs of the public works department or the wastewater treatment plant, where we have metal decks on those. And if they got dinged up and it was aesthetic, then we're more likely to have travelers cover the aesthetic on that than EMC possibly. If it got hit with a 1.5 or 2 inch diameter hail up to there, they possibly at that point still wouldn't cover it, because they could still say that it meets the requirements for form, fit, and function. So that's where you have to consider, yeah, it's a $5,000 versus $25,000 deductible, but what is the risk that you're willing to accept? And then you think about, on top of that, is you have to think of when, yes, it's based off of assessed value, but you have cost estimators for EMC and you will have cost estimators for travelers. So what can happen is, depending on who's doing the cost estimate, and could be completely arbitrary and it depends on a lot of factors. But if you have one company that offers very small deductibles, then they're probably also going to be very skimpy, possibly comparatively on how much money they hand out, or a larger deductible, and it just depends on how much money they hand out. So there is the possibility that EMC might only, for a certain damage, cover 100,000 minus a $5,000 deductible, and you're sitting at 95,000 money that you would get to work with on a contractor on the repairs. But then you could have travelers cover either 100 or 125 or vice versa and have a $25,000 deductible and still being coming out even or not. So you have these two factors of where do the estimators for these companies tend to lie with how they do their cost estimates with the deductibles. And then on top of that, are you willing to accept the risk on the aesthetics for the soft metals and the other metals that EMC would not cover? So that's what you have to consider. And I want people to understand, it's not me pushing one way or the other. I just want people to understand what the risks are for that amount of money that you feel that you're going to save on a deductible, which could, depending on the cost estimates and other factors coming in, could be, for a lack of better words, arbitrary, but that's not probably the best word to use. But so that is just what I want people to understand.
Mr. Hendershot, can you remind us what the cost difference is between Travelers and EMC, what the actual real dollar difference is in the premium?
Sorry, Mokeisha, do you have those numbers?
I don't have the exact number in front of me. It was about $3,800, so it wasn't that big of a difference.
That's annual savings or annual
And
difference.
yeah, annually. Correct.
So
EMC was more?
Yeah, EMC was more by about $3,800, but then we were looking at the difference in the deductible and how likelihood we would have to have that type of claim. That's what we were looking at.
What makes sense to me is to save the $3,800 and go ahead and run the risk of the $25,000 deductible. The reason why I say that is if you have hail damage on a roof, you're definitely going to have hail damage on your guttering. That's going to be cosmetic in nature, more than likely. We're going to still probably replace that. And if it results in panel damage or other types of damage to metal siding, we're still going to want to make the improvements to those facilities. It makes more sense to me to save the money now and run the risk that we may have to pay a higher deductible, but at the end of that, have all the aesthetic and the function replaced. How does everybody feel about that?
Doesn't sound like a bad idea to me. I think it's well worth it. Like you said, it's we're going to pay a certain amount anyway out, and but that's going to help us recover some of the costs on the soft damages. So we could end up being money ahead.
Could be, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, any other comments?
The one thing that I need to disclose is that I would, if you decide to go with Travelers, I'm going to abstain from the vote. And I won't make a motion on that one because our company does a ton of work with Travelers, and I'm not pushing Travelers so everybody understands. I just want people to know that our company does a lot of work with Travelers, and, you know, I just don't want people thinking that there's a conflict of interest. I would abstain, and then if it were to what? Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong. If we were to go to that direction and it was a 2-2 vote, the abstention would carry as a yes.
Typically, yes, but I would just break the tie.
Okay, I would appreciate that. And if we were to go with EMC, I personally am not going to support a motion going that direction. So I would just sit there and say that I'm not going to make a motion for them. So just because it's not anything other than I'm not willing to accept the risk for the not covering the aesthetics for the metals.
Okay. Any other comments? All right.
Okay, if I can chime in, Mr. Mayor, it's Kevin O'Brien and the insurance broker, and Jim asked me to sit in on the meeting, and I just want to say thank you for allowing me to sit here. And good evening to you and the council members and staff. I think Mr. Leeton makes a very good point, especially if the construction of those buildings is a fair amount of metal that could be damaged cosmetically by hail, because that is something that EMC won't pay for unless, as Mr. Leeton correctly pointed out, there's the functionality is compromised.
Okay.
And a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong, the claim adjuster coming out, working with the claim handler may not make that determination. And then they might have to actually bring out somebody similar to me as an engineer who makes a report that comes out, and then they're providing whether or not, in their professional opinion, whether or not you have or have not been affected on the function. So then you get into a little bit of a drawn out process possibly on that. I mean, you could get into that also possibly with Travelers, but not to the degree of what you would sit there and say if you just completely are saying that we're not going to be covering metals for aesthetics.
Okay. Council members, any other questions or comments? If not, would entertain a motion consistent with consistent with whichever direction the movement wants to go. That would be item number 4, consideration of resolution 2021. I believe we've given direction on the liability piece.
Okay, so which one are we looking at here? I'm looking at our.
First, let me just make sure. I'm sorry, Mr. Owen. Mr. Hendershot, we've addressed what we need to. I think the consensus is that we'll move forward with Travelers.
If you're comfortable in doing that, sir, I would suggest maybe a motion to formally move forward with either Travelers or EMC.
Okay. All right, we ready then, Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I make a motion that we approve staying with Travelers Insurance, or accepting Travelers Insurance. Is that for our liability? That's not for
Yes.
our liability. Liability?
Yes, sir.
For our liability for the term of 21 to 22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor
Aye.
Aye.
and opposed, abstain.
Aye.
Motion carries 401. This takes us to item number 4, consideration of resolution 2021-R-06, authorizing withdrawal of the city from participation in Midwest Public Risk. Ms. Jones.
Yes, so what was sent out to you was a resolution. It turns out that we need a formal resolution from the governing body in addition to the letter that I send them that authorizes us to withdraw from NPR and then to go with CBIZ and Humana. If we do not submit this resolution with the letter that I submit to them, I read in the bylaws that they will charge us 25% of what we pay them on an annual basis for not following their procedure. And that is why we need to get this resolved.
All right, would entertain a motion.
Okay, I make a motion for the city to pass a resolution to withdraw from Midwest Public Risk.
It would be resolution 2021 R-06. Is that correct, Mr. Leeton?
So moved.
Second,
Do we have a second?
second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor,
Aye.
Aye.
motion carries 500. This concludes our formal agenda for the special meeting, and I wish everybody a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you.
Bye.
Easter.
Night.